The night was quiet in Los Angeles. City lights shimmered like small stars. But inside Keanu Reeves's home, the glow came from something else. He sat alone on his couch reading a simple letter written on a wrinkled sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, but every word felt alive. The letter began, "Dear Keanu, I lost my legs last year in an accident, but your movies kept me strong. When I wanted to give up, I watched you fight for others and stand again. You taught me what courage looks like. Thank you for helping me smile again." The name at the end was Eli, age 16. Below it was a picture of a boy sitting in a wheelchair, smiling proudly next to an old laptop. Keanu looked at the photo for a long time. Something about the boy's eyes reminded him of the quiet hope he once had when he lost people he loved. Keanu called no one. He didn't post about it. He didn't even tell his manager. The next morning, he got into his car and started driving. No security, no cameras, just a quiet man on a simple mission. After a few hours on the road, he arrived at a small rehabilitation center hidden between hills. The paint on the walls had faded and the entrance sign leaned to one side, but the air around it was full of warmth. Nurses walked past with soft smiles and laughter echoed faintly from inside. He went to the reception and introduced himself only as John, a volunteer who wanted to help fix old wheelchairs. The nurse looked surprised but grateful. Within an hour, Keanu wore a plain gray shirt and gloves, quietly repairing an old wheelchair in the corner of the hall. That was when Eli entered. He was smaller than Keanu imagined, but his energy filled the room. He pushed himself forward with a joyful smile, carrying a small notebook full of drawings. He waved at everyone, and when he saw Keanu, he rolled closer. "Hey, you're new here," Eli said cheerfully. "You fixing that one for me?" Keanu smiled softly. "Maybe. Does this one belong to you?" Eli nodded and laughed. "It keeps making a strange squeak every time I turn left." "Drives me crazy." Keanu bent down, checking the wheel carefully. "I can fix that," he said quietly. "But I might need a story in return." Eli raised an eyebrow. "A story?" Keanu smiled. "Yeah. I work faster when I hear good stories." Eli grinned and started talking. He told Keanu about his love for movies, about how he dreamed of being a stunt director one day, even though he could no longer walk. He talked about his mother, who worked 2 jobs, and how he built a small robot from broken toys to make her smile. As Eli spoke, Keanu listened like every word was gold. He didn't interrupt. He didn't act like a star. He just listened. And when Eli said, "Sometimes I think I'll never be normal again," Keanu looked up and said gently, "Maybe normal isn't the goal. Maybe brave is." Eli went silent for a moment, then smiled again. "You talk like Keanu Reeves," he said playfully. Keanu chuckled. "I get that sometimes. They spent the whole afternoon together." When Eli tried to lift a heavy toolbox, Keanu stopped him. "Let me," he said. "You already lift more than anyone I know." By sunset, the wheelchair rolled smoothly. No squeak, no shaking. Eli spun around the hall, laughing in excitement. The nurse clapped and others joined in. Keanu just stood there, smiling quietly, proud to see the boy's happiness. As the day ended, Eli asked softly, "John, will you come back tomorrow?" Keanu looked into the boy's hopeful eyes. "If I can, I will," he said. "But remember, heroes are not people who fix things. Heroes are people who keep trying." Eli nodded seriously and held out his hand. Keanu shook it, his grip gentle and full of respect. Later that night, Keanu spoke privately to the head nurse. He learned that Eli's surgery, scheduled for next month, had been canceled because the donation fund was cut. Without the surgery, Eli would never walk again. Keanu said nothing. He simply took out a piece of paper, wrote a note, and left it in the nurse's hand before walking out quietly. The note said, "For Eli's surgery, from a friend who believes he will run again." The next morning, the payment was confirmed in full. The donation came from an anonymous source. Eli's mother cried when she heard the news. No one knew who the donor was, not even Eli. Keanu drove away, the sunrise lighting his face through the windshield. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, "Sometimes the world doesn't need heroes. It just needs hearts that care." But this was only the beginning. because a few weeks later, someone else would arrive at that same center and uncover the secret Keanu tried to hide. And her name was Sandra Bullock. A few weeks passed after Keanu's quiet visit. Life at the rehabilitation center went on as usual. Nurses moved from room to room. Laughter filled the halls, and Eli's surgery date drew closer. He practiced small exercises daily, his spirit brighter than ever. One bright morning, the center director gathered everyone in the main hall. There was excitement in the air. A famous actress was coming to visit as part of a kindness documentary project. Most of the children didn't know who she was, but the adults whispered her name with admiration. By noon, a black car stopped outside. Sandra Bullock stepped out wearing a simple white shirt, blue jeans, and a gentle smile. There was no makeup artist, no red carpet, no camera crew except for one quiet cameraman following her for the documentary. She walked into the hall with calm confidence, greeting everyone like an old friend. The children surrounded her instantly. She laughed warmly and sat on the floor with them, listening to their stories one by one. Her kindness was natural, not staged for the camera. She held a child's hand, asked about their dreams, and promised to help the center raise more awareness. While walking through the hallway, Sandra noticed a wheelchair with the initials KR7 carved faintly near the wheel. She paused for a moment, running her hand over the mark. Something about it felt familiar. She turned to the nurse beside her and asked softly, "Who fixed this one?" The nurse smiled. "A volunteer did. A quiet man who came by a few weeks ago. He didn't share his full name." Sandra smiled, but her eyes stayed on the letters. She whispered to herself, "KR7, that's strange." She knew those were Keanu's initials from his racing number years ago. Later that day, Sandra met Eli. The boy's energy made her laugh instantly. He showed her his drawings of future inventions and even offered to design a new kind of movie wheelchair. When Sandra asked what inspired him, he said proudly, "A man named John. He fixed my chair and told me to stay brave." Sandra froze for a second. "John?" she asked. "Yeah," Eli said. "He looked a bit like Keanu Reeves, but older and calmer." Sandra's smile widened, but her heart beat faster. She had known Keanu for years. He had that quiet habit of helping others without telling anyone. She wondered if he had come here secretly. When the interviews for the documentary ended, Sandra sat with the center director to discuss more support. During their talk, she gently asked about any recent donations. The director flipped through some records and said, "Actually, there was one large anonymous donation last month. It covered Eli's surgery completely. The note just said, 'From a friend who believes he will run again.'" Sandra felt her throat tighten. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes misting over. It sounded exactly like something Keanu would write. That night in her hotel room, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every memory of Keanu's quiet generosity, the way he once gave his movie crew bonuses from his own salary, the way he sat alone with homeless people and listened to them, and how he always refused attention for it. Sandra whispered to herself, "He never changes." Even after all these years. The next morning, she decided to confirm her suspicion. She called Keanu's assistant, pretending she wanted to discuss a future film collaboration. When she casually mentioned the rehabilitation center's name, there was a brief silence before the assistant replied, "Oh, yes. He went there last month, didn't he?" Sandra smiled softly. Her guess was right. But now a new idea formed in her mind. If he wanted to keep his kindness hidden, maybe she could reveal it in a way that inspired others, not embarrassed him. Before leaving the center, she asked the director for permission to host a small event in 2 weeks to honor anonymous donors and volunteers who supported the children. The director agreed happily, unaware of her real plan. When she left, Eli rolled up to her and handed her a small drawing. It showed a tall man fixing a wheelchair beside a boy. Below it were written the words, "To my silent hero." Sandra took the paper gently. "This is beautiful," she said. "Would you help me with something, Eli? I want to thank your hero properly." Eli smiled. "Anything for John." As her car drove away, Sandra looked at the drawing again. Deep down, she knew the truth. Keanu hadn't just repaired a chair. He had repaired hope, and she wanted the world to see that. But what she didn't know yet was that her plan would lead to something even more emotional. Something that would make both her and Keanu face. memories they had buried long ago. The event she planned to honor his kindness would soon turn into a moment the world would never forget. 2 quiet weeks passed. The rehabilitation center looked brighter than before. Colorful balloons hung in the hall, and children practiced songs for a special event. They were told the celebration was to honor the people who helped them heal, especially one mysterious donor who never gave his name. Sandra Bullock arrived early that morning wearing a soft blue dress and a smile full of warmth. She helped the staff arrange chairs, carried boxes of food, and made sure every child had something nice to wear. The air was full of joy and curiosity. Eli waited near the entrance, excited to show Sandra something. He held a small clay model he had made, a man fixing a wheelchair beside a boy. When Sandra saw it, she felt her heart melt. She knelt beside him and whispered, "He'll love this when he sees it." Eli smiled brightly. "You mean John?" Sandra nodded gently but didn't explain more. As the guests began to arrive, Sandra made one final call. She dialed Keanu's number, and after a few rings, his calm voice answered, "Hey, Sandra, everything all right?" She smiled softly. "Yeah, all good. Actually, I wanted to invite you to a small event. It's for a kindness documentary I'm doing. You'll like it. It's at a center outside the city." Keanu hesitated. "A kindness documentary? I don't think I'd fit in that." "Trust me," she said. "You belong there more than anyone." He chuckled lightly. "When is it?" "Today," she replied quickly. "If you're free, come around 4. "You'll see why I asked." He sighed gently but agreed. "All right, I'll be there." The afternoon sun was bright when Keanu's car pulled up near the center. He wore a simple black jacket and jeans, blending in easily. As he stepped out, he noticed children running around, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. One of them nearly bumped into him, giggling, and Keanu smiled softly. Inside, Sandra was preparing a short speech. She turned when she saw him enter, her eyes lighting up. "You made it," she said. "You said I'd like it," he replied quietly. "You will," she said with a hint of mystery. The event began with music and laughter. The children performed a short song about heroes and hope. Nurses and staff clapped along, and parents wiped tears from their eyes. Then the center director stepped forward and announced, "Today, we honor the people who gave us strength, especially one anonymous friend who helped a young boy believe he could walk again." Keanu's expression changed. He looked down, realizing what was happening. The director continued, "We never learned his name, but his kindness made this place brighter." Sandra stepped forward, holding Eli's small clay model. She lifted it gently and said, "This was made by Eli, the boy whose life changed because of a stranger's gift. He calls this piece to my silent hero." The audience clapped warmly. Keanu looked around, his eyes soft and uncertain. Then Sandra spoke again, her voice calm but emotional. "When we think of heroes, we often think of people on screens. But sometimes, the real heroes are the ones who walk quietly into people's lives and leave light behind without asking for anything in return." She turned toward Keanu and said softly, "And sometimes they sit right among us." The lights dimmed, and a short video began playing on the screen. It showed photos of the rehabilitation center, clips of Eli's progress, and at the end, the note that said, "From a friend who believes he will run again." Keanu froze. He looked at Sandra, realizing she knew. She had found out everything. The audience waited, not sure what was happening, but they felt the emotion in the air. Eli rolled onto the stage holding his handmade card. He looked straight at Keanu and said in a trembling voice, "John, I know it was you." Keanu's eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak but couldn't. The hall went silent. Sandra placed her hand gently on his shoulder and whispered, "It's okay. Let them know the truth of kindness." Keanu stepped forward slowly. He knelt beside Eli and said softly, "I didn't want you to know. I just wanted you to believe that good things can happen." Eli smiled through tears. "They did." "Because of you!" The crowd stood and clapped. Many wiped their eyes, and even the cameraman filming for the documentary forgot to move. But as emotional as the moment was, Sandra knew this was not the end. She had one more surprise, something that would take this moment beyond admiration and turn it into a movement of kindness. She walked toward the microphone and said, This story isn't about one man's kindness. It's about what kindness can grow into, and that's why we're not stopping here. Her words made the audience lean in. Something bigger was coming. Something that would make everyone in that room cry for a different reason. A reason that reached far beyond fame or generosity. The crowd was still clapping when Sandra lifted her hand gently. The applause faded into silence. She looked around at the faces, nurses, children, parents, even Keanu, and said softly, "Every act of kindness deserves to be continued. Today we're going to do that together." She turned toward the screen behind her. A new image appeared. Drawings and photos of children at the center who still needed surgeries, therapy, and school help. Her voice grew steadier. There are 27 children here who still wait for help. One man started something beautiful. Now it's our turn to keep it alive. Keanu watched her carefully, realizing what she was doing. This wasn't just an event to honor him. She was building something greater from his quiet act. Sandra walked closer to Eli and placed her hand on his shoulder. "This brave boy taught me something," she said. "He told me heroes are people who keep trying. So today we'll try together." She reached into her bag and took out a small silver envelope. She handed it to the director and said, "This covers every remaining surgery, every wheelchair, every therapy session for the children in this center." The director opened it with trembling hands and gasped. Inside was a check for a large sum signed simply from Eli's friends, led by Sandra Bullock. A wave of emotion spread through the hall. Nurses covered their mouths. Parents began crying quietly. Eli looked up at Sandra with wide eyes. Keanu stood motionless for a few seconds. Then he walked toward her, his voice quiet but full of emotion. "You didn't have to do this," Sandra smiled softly. "You didn't have to either. But you did, and you reminded me what real kindness looks like." The audience watched as the two friends stood side by side. Sandra continued, "This isn't about giving money or fame. It's about giving hope, because hope travels farther than we think." She turned to the children and said warmly, "I want you all to promise me something. When you grow up, no matter where life takes you, help one person. Just one, and tell them to do the same." The children nodded, their faces glowing in the soft light. One small girl raised her hand and asked, "Will that really change the world?" Sandra bent down to her level and whispered, "It already has." Keanu couldn't stop his tears now. He knelt beside Eli again and said, "You see, Eli, kindness moves in circles. You started one by writing that letter. I just joined it. And now she did too. One small letter changed everything." Eli's voice trembled as he said, "So I made all this happen?" Keanu smiled. "You reminded us why goodness matters. That's the biggest thing anyone can do." The cameraman quietly zoomed in on that moment. Eli's small hand holding Keanu's, Sandra standing beside them with tears in her eyes. There were no rehearsed words, no dramatic music. Only truth and warmth filled the room. Then something unexpected happened. The center's receptionist came running in with her phone. "The video is live," she said. Someone streamed it online. "It's already spreading everywhere." Within minutes, social media began to flood with clips from the event. People around the world watched as a simple boy, an actor, and an actress turned one quiet act into a global lesson. Comments poured in. "This is what real heroes look like. Faith in humanity restored, kindness still exists." But in the middle of all that attention, Keanu felt uneasy. He never wanted fame for this. He whispered to Sandra, "I didn't mean for it to go public." She smiled gently. "Then don't look at it as fame. Look at it as light. People can't follow kindness if they never see it." Keanu nodded slowly. Maybe light needs to be seen to guide others. By evening, news channels started covering the story. They called it the Kindness Circle. Journalists wanted interviews, but Sandra and Keanu refused all of them. Instead, they asked for the focus to stay on the children and the center. Later that night, after everyone left, Keanu sat quietly on the steps outside the building. The night breeze was cool, carrying the sound of laughter from inside. Sandra joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed him one and said softly, "You know, when I first found that carved mark KR7, I knew it was you. I didn't want to expose you. I just wanted to remind the world that good people still exist. Keanu looked at her and smiled faintly. You did more than that. You gave kindness a voice. She took a slow sip of her tea. And you gave it a start. They sat in silence for a while, watching the lights inside the center flicker softly. Then Sandra said, "This isn't over. Tomorrow, the real work begins. We'll make sure more centers like this get help. No press, no red carpet. Just people helping people." Keanu nodded. "I'm in." The two of them looked at the horizon, where the faint first light of dawn began to appear. It was calm and peaceful, but something deeper waited ahead, a hidden piece of the story that neither of them knew yet. Because inside the old center's archives, a forgotten file was about to reveal something that would shock them both. A connection between Eli's past and Keanu's life that no one had ever known. The next morning, the center was filled with news vans outside, but inside, peace still ruled. Sandra and Keanu helped pack supplies for the children, keeping their promise to stay humble. As they were leaving, an old nurse approached them holding a dusty folder. "This was found in storage," she said. "It has Eli's name on it." Sandra opened it carefully. Inside was a faded envelope with a note and a photograph. The note was dated 16 years earlier. It was from a volunteer who once worked at a city hospital. It read, "To the child I helped the night of the accident. May you always find someone who believes in you. Just as someone once believed in me." The signature at the bottom froze Keanu. K. Reeves. He stared in disbelief. Sandra's voice trembled as she said, "Keanu, this is your handwriting?" He nodded slowly, eyes misting. "Years ago, I donated at a hospital after a car crash. I never knew the child's name." "It was him." Sandra covered her mouth in shock. "So Eli was the boy you helped twice in your life. Once without knowing, and once again now." Keanu sat down quietly, holding the letter. "Kindness really does return in circles," he whispered. Sandra smiled softly, tears in her eyes. "And you completed yours." They both looked through the window where Eli laughed with other children. For a moment, the world felt still, as if destiny had paused to show its meaning. That evening, the sun set gently over the rehabilitation center, painting the walls with golden light. Keanu and Sandra stood outside, still holding the letter that connected the past and present. The moment felt unreal. Neither spoke for a while, letting the quiet truth settle. Eli rolled out through the main doors, his face full of joy. He waved at them and said, "They said my surgery is in 2 weeks. I'm going to walk again." Keanu smiled, his voice soft but steady. "You already walked further than most people ever do, Eli. Walking isn't only with legs, it's with courage." Eli looked at the letter in Keanu's hand and asked, "What's that?" Keanu knelt down beside him and said gently, "It's something that belongs to you. I think I met you once before, many years ago. You were just a baby, and I didn't know your name." Eli's eyes widened. "So it was you back then, too?" Keanu nodded. "Maybe kindness wanted us to meet again." The boy reached out his hand, and Keanu placed the old letter in it. Eli held it close like treasure. Sandra watched them with tears in her eyes. She whispered softly, "This isn't just a story about a fan meeting an actor. It's about life meeting kindness twice." Inside the hall, nurses began lighting small clay lamps that the children had made for the celebration. One by one, the lamps glowed, filling the room with soft light. Sandra looked at the sight and said, "Let's take one home for each of us. It'll remind us what we saw today." Keanu nodded, lifting one small lamp carefully. The flame flickered, calm but bright. "Maybe we should give these away," he said, "to people who forget that light still exists." The director heard them and smiled. "We can make that happen. We'll call it the Circle of Light Project. Every person who receives a lamp will pass it to another when they perform an act of kindness." Sandra looked at Keanu with a proud smile. "See what you started?" One quiet act turned into something the whole world will carry. He shook his head gently. "No, it wasn't me. It was him," he said, pointing to Eli. It began with a letter written with hope. A soft cheer rose inside as the children sang again. Sandra and Keanu stood together watching them, their faces glowing in the golden light. The camera that filmed the documentary kept rolling, but neither cared anymore. This wasn't for fame. It was for the soul. A week later, the video reached millions of people across the world. Messages poured in from strangers saying they had helped someone after watching the story. Hospitals, schools, and shelters began sharing their own circle of light lamps. During one interview, a reporter asked Sandra what she felt after everything that happened. She smiled warmly and said, "I didn't do anything special. I just joined the kindness," he began. When they asked Keanu for his comment, he said quietly, "Real heroes don't wear capes. They hold hands." Months later, Eli's surgery succeeded. He took his first steps in the same hall where he met Keanu for the first time. The children clapped, nurses cried, and a single lamp burned brightly near the window. Keanu watched silently, proud and humbled. Sandra stood beside him, whispering, "You gave him light?" Keanu shook his head gently and replied, "He gave it back." As the final camera shot faded, the narrator's voice echoed softly. Kindness does not end when it's shared. It begins again. And somewhere in that warm hall, the small boy, the silent actor, and the gentle actress proved that hearts connected by kindness can light the whole world.